Please welcome Edward Skyler, Citi's Executive Vice President, Tshepo Mahloele, Founder and Group Executive Director at Harith General Partners, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, President and Founder of Umlambo Foundation with CNBC's Seema Mody.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Global Citizens and Hugh Evans for inviting me to moderate today. I'm excited to convene this discussion with three leaders that span continents, the government, and the private sector on this discussion around financial inclusion and the crucial role to support girls and women across the world. Let's start the conversation right there with Dr. Phumzile. Right now, we know women's reproductive rights are in the headlines here in the US and overseas. You've often said that to end poverty, we must support women's reproductive rights in marginalized communities. Explain what you mean by that.
Thank you very much, and good morning. You know, women's reproductive rights define a lot of progress that women have made everywhere. If you remember, maybe you don't, you're young, but I remember very well, there was a time when women did not have easy access to contraception, which meant that a woman could not plan whether she was going to work, whether she was going to leave children at home, and that just defined how economically active she can be. The absorption and the participation of women in the labor force is defined by access to contraception. So reproductive health for women, from prevention to termination of pregnancy if they need to, is a health issue, is an economic issue, and it should not be treated as a political football, because you take away from women the rights for them to determine their lives. Can you imagine if men did not know when, well, maybe sometimes they don't know, often, when they were going to have children. But just not knowing this bundle of joy that you have, which takes out all your life, and you have them one by one by one, and you have no control over that, it is a terrible disorganization in anyone's life.
Amen. You know, Ed, as a daughter of two immigrants, I was also always told that financial independence as a woman is key to our success. I was looking at some numbers last year. The amount of money that went to women from venture capital, appalling. I mean, you would think this is 1940s, not 2021. Only 2% of venture capital money went to female founders. Of that, 0.34% to Black founders. What is the issue here, and why is it taking so long?
Yeah, well, I can't say exactly what the issue is because it's absolutely confounding. I mean, I have no problem with, white men. I happen to be one, but it's sort of crazy to suggest that we have all the best ideas that require or deserve investment. So when we launched our impact fund in 2020, we launched it with a $150 million commitment. It was the largest impact fund from a bank using its own capital as opposed to investing on behalf of its investors. We made a commitment that we were going to do all the seed funding to either women or minority-led entrepreneurs. And then shortly after, we announced an additional $50 million just for Black entrepreneurs. And for those that think there are some choice as far as returns versus who you invest with, our returns are just fine. The impact, we deployed about $100 million in capital so far over the last couple of years. We're very proud of the record. We're very proud of the portfolio. We have really innovative, the whole purpose of the fund is to invest in basically double bottom line companies. And we've met some great entrepreneurs that are helping solve societal problems, like in Pallet, where they're building dignified, shelters, community shelters for people that find themselves homeless or victims of natural disasters. Sweeten, which helps people essentially just repair their homes by matching them with responsible contractors, and just trying to solve the pain points that people face. And it goes back to our roots as trying to enable progress and find solutions to problems. But we think it's a false choice between making dedicated investments and focusing on certain groups and supporting certain groups. And I think the performance of our fund shows that.
Oh, that makes sense. Tshepo, your focus has really been around blended finance. Unpack that phrase for us. What does it mean, and how do you think it can play a key role in ending poverty in Africa?
I think with our experience on a continent and the challenges with which it is to raise capital, it has been necessary to find different ways to bring a whole lot of capital to be able to support the continent and its development. And my own big take about it is that, until we're going to be very deliberate about certain, as a business person and perhaps an entrepreneur, I know that to get the outcomes that I want, I need to be very deliberate about the inputs and what I do and how I focus those issues. And with the continent, in terms of where it's at now, we found it necessary to be able to try bring different forms of capital to unlock a whole lot of projects that just don't get off the ground. And as a result, you don't have that alleviation of poverty, because you don't even have the continent being able to get to the starting blocks of being able to compete with the world, with the global thing. So we first went to Africans and said, before you get anybody to invest in you, you're going to need to do something yourself first. And we raised, our first fund was solely and wholly based from African institutions. And we also took a deliberate decision to say that to be able to attract properly priced capital to these infrastructure projects, you're going to first need to get a good layer of equity to ensure that all these institutions, which come with debt and what you want to call mass capital, but which actually requires an equity return, it's which is very unfortunate for the country. We said to Africans, first put in a good layer of equity therein to reduce that. And then we also got in development finance institutions we were lucky in our second fund. We even started getting high net worth individuals to start backing up long-term infrastructure. So therefore, bringing those development capital, bringing some of the banks in there, bringing life companies, insurance companies to enable, and structuring also in some of the projects some insurance products around the project. We were able to make some of these projects happen, over the last 16, 17 years. And I think that's what we had to do, because the environment would not provide long-term capital to the continent. And so that layer of bringing all the different parties to make this happen was what enabled us to.
And why was it hard to bring on long-term capital? Some of the issues there, and why you've had to resort to sort of these different financial tools?
Nobody's taking a long-term view on the continent's own development. And for you to be able to construct and develop a power project or a bridge, to maybe make access in a city of Cote d'Ivoire easy, or rail projects, you need long-term money. You can't do it with 5-year money. You can't do it with 10-year money. You're going to need the type of capital which will then say, this is a project that must last for the next 30, 40, 50 years. So you're doing it with short-term capital, it then doesn't even start. When that capital, instead of being priced at 2% in dollar terms, or even below, we've seen some of the OECD countries, even getting at less for the stimulus packages. For the continent, you start getting that money at 8%. You can't even start. It becomes a very challenging program issue.
No, that makes sense. Dr. Phumzile, when we talk about the upward mobility of women, what's the role of men?
They must stop the mess. The issue of gender equality has been on the shoulders of women. and yet they are not the source of the problem. We ask women to do so much, and frankly, right now, I don't know if we can ask women for anything more. We need to work with men and create a feminist men, feminist boys that we bring up so that they can integrate in the movement and in their own rights be the leaders of the movement that we need. If you think about gender-based violence, it's just the men. It's the only one who can stop it. If men were to decide that I will not beat up a woman, problem solved. So we go around women, the one who's receiving the bashing, and she has to be the one to be active and try to fight gender-based violence. If we talk about child marriage, the brothers, the uncles, the fathers, the chiefs, they have to take a stand on this issue because the women are forced to get married to older men. The girls are forced to get married to older men because the father says so. I mean, it's amazing power that men have, that even those who are not committing these crimes need to be worried about how they are part of a cohort, a population that is so oppressive to other human beings. And we need to engage with men in such a way that also they don't think that they're doing something heroic. They're just living a life that is decent. Because you can't praise a fish for swimming. They must just get up, live their lives, and we as women must also not take a stance that says the women's struggle is only for women. Because you are demobilizing people that you actually need. This is a numbers game as well. You are demobilizing people that you really live. So after having been long in the struggle for women, because now I'm old, I'm a go-go grandmother, I'm just realized how all along the way we've missed real serious opportunity to engage men and to give them responsibility. And this is now my issue. Guys, take this thing up.
You feel
Really.
it. I think we're all feeling it. And the need. Powerful words there. Tshepo, what would you say? How do we break down these cultural stereotypes held by men?
Listen to like Phumzile. Yes. I think we must listen to her and do that. But I think, with respect to that, from my own young experience, unless we are very deliberate about our interventions, unless we are very direct and forthright, and the one thing I sort of like appreciate and having also joined and be a big fan of Global Citizen is the way in which it's able to say, let's start agitating for certain outcomes. Let's start agitating for certain policy directions. Let's start agitating for leadership to assume its role. And unless those deliberate interventions are done, we're not going to get there. But what these platforms in the form of Global Citizen are able to do is to able to ensure that there's enough of that agitation so that we can, the populace can start taking the future into their own hands, so that we stop being victims and start asking somebody to come to our rescue, so that people take that responsibility into their own. I think for me, it starts with the individual. It starts with each and every one doing their bit, agitating, ensuring that whoever is in a leadership position, whoever is in a position to be able to make a difference, whoever is in a position to get certain proper policy things put in place, actually do their job in that way that benefits the society in general. And I think that would be the way we need to be able to, from from my point of view.
Yeah. And Citi has really stepped up to address this issue at Global Citizens Live in September of last year, announcing a support of 15 million low-income households, including 10 million women by 2025. What progress have you guys made?
Well, we're about 4 million into the overall goal and 3.5 million for women. But just, you know, it's not only abhorrent from a human rights perspective, gender inequity, it's also economically destructive. I mean, we estimate that having gender equity would add about $2 trillion in GDP annually. So even if it doesn't offend you morally, it should offend you economically. And that's why we invest behind the UN's SDGs. But you're not going to get economic inclusion unless you get financial inclusion, unless you get people in the financial system. I mean, 1 out of 5 people are unbanked. And that's why when we try to reach this globally, about 1.7 billion, and that's why as we try to hit our 10 million, our goal of supporting 10 million women globally, we try to find ways to solve the chicken and egg problems that sort of stop women from participating in the financial system. You know, for example, now, if you, so much of the payment system is being run by phone, but you could be in a country where you can't get a phone if you don't have a credit score. So these cycles sort of unfortunately reinforce each other. So we work with providers in Mexico, such as PayNow, which actually help you build a credit history so you can get a mobile phone, because sometimes it's not about the loans, it's about actually the phones. And so we have to think about innovative ways to support people, get them into the systems so they can work themselves out of the predicaments they're in.
Yeah, Dr. Phumzile, you and I discussed this, the success of microloans across Africa, but specifically digital literacy. You think that's the next initiative to really help?
You know, absolutely. I mean, everything digital is the next thing for everyone, but very much so for poor people, because digital literacy enables those people who have no access to the banking system as it has existed. With digital literacy and therefore getting involved in digital finance, they are able to have access to financial services, but also they are able to move money without having to move themselves. And you don't know how much of the time it saves, because time is something that women don't have. How much of the money they save, which they would use moving from point A to point B. So there's, I mean, just a win-win-win-win-win knockdown in the introduction of digital literacy. And we must make sure that women are not being left behind, that families who are poor in general are not out of the digital space. I think it's important for us to keep on emphasizing that digital literacy is now a basic need. It's as important as water, it's as important as health, etc. When governments do not have departments that are so focused on providing this service, which gives also information, they are locking out the poor people for something they definitely need in order to navigate their lives.
Well, I think we all feel empowered by this discussion and those powerful words. Dr. Phumzile, Tshepo, and Ed, thank you for your time today.